Stars come in every size. Some are wise and some otherwise. They got pretty blue eyes. For now a man may change.
Steve, thank you again for taking the time to see me today. We're here because it's the 50th anniversary of two Genesis albums, 2 in 1 year, Trick of the Tail and Wind and Wuthering.
Right.
We're going to start with Trick.
Yeah.
So just to set the scene,
Yep.
May 75, Peter
Yep.
basically does his last concert.
Yes.
You're going into the recording studio a few months later in October, and in the interim, Gabriel's departure's been announced.
Yes.
The critics have written you off as a band,
Yep.
and to cap it all, the band is in debt.
Yes.
So against that background,
Yeah.
what was it like when you first stepped into the studio? What was the atmosphere and the mood music?
Okay. Well, it was a bit tricky because, to take you back a little bit, Peter left, and the mood within the band was pretty much all, let's go off and do solo projects. Apart from Tony, people were getting involved in other things. Mike was going to do something with Anthony Phillips. It was going to be a double header. I'm trying to remember if Phil was appearing on a lot of people's albums, usually as a drummer.
Yeah.
And he was, I think this might have been the beginnings of Brand X for him.
Mm-hmm.
I'd just done a solo thing. So there was literally one day in between. I'd just finished my solo thing and I had to miss the vinyl cut of my album in order to be there for the Genesis stuff. So there wasn't a lot of breathing room between the two. Two members of the band had helped me to make that album.
That was Mike and Phil.
Yeah, so here we were, I think I showed up on day 2 of rehearsal.
Yeah.
That's my memory, that I was a day late because I think I'd been asked by the record company, can we have another track out of you, for the solo thing. And so I came up with something in short order, but it meant that it was eating into the Genesis schedule. But as far as I remember, I was just a day late. I think, there was this sort of feeling of uncertainty with the band, that nobody really knew, are we going to survive Peter Gabriel's departure? Peter's performance live would be reviewed separately from the band.
Yeah.
I think that quite a number of people regarded Pete as Genesis, and particularly media who were interested in what is Pete going to be wearing. David will be wearing those flares. Pete will be wearing a fox's head on his...
But that was the external view, wasn't it?
Yes, that was the external view. The inside was very different, and I think there was a lot of frustration within the band. Personally, I didn't have a problem with the fact that Peter wanted to do anything he liked. Whatever he chose to wear was fine. We'd agreed on whatever the presentation was going to be, and that was fine. If he wanted to show up with a box on his head or a fox's head or in a straight jacket, that was absolutely fine.
But we're now...
Pete was very theatrical, and I think it was part of the appeal of the band. I think without that, there wouldn't have been the photos on the front of Melody Maker. And in a pre-video era, we were still in a pre-video era.
But post-Peter, this moment where you're in the studio for the first time as the four of you, was there any sense of confidence? Was it trepidation? What did it feel like being in that studio?
It wasn't easy, I have to say. Not everyone in the band was happy that we'd gone off to do ostensibly solo projects. I felt we needed that to have breathing space after Pete's departure.
And you were the first one to do it as well.
Yeah, for everyone to let off steam. So the idea was to do that, just to let off some steam and then come back. I'd grown in confidence, but it did mean that by the time I was working with the band, there was a dearth of ideas from me. It was like giving birth twice. That's how it felt. I just had a baby. Now I'm having another baby.
Yes.
Having said that, parts of Dance on a Volcano were mine, Entangled ostensibly, Los Endos ostensibly.
Then you did the midsection in Ripples, as I understand.
Midsection in Ripples, which I thought was one of my better writing contributions, because I'd pulled the melody out of the keyboard part, and I thought mistakenly that might become as famous as the solo on Firth of Fifth.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, the line was fairly classical in nature, to be honest, even though it was played on a distorted guitar, using a synthy hi-fly to lop off the front of the note, so it sounded like live backwards guitar. You could do live backwards suddenly, and then we reversed the tape and we added a pre-echo, so it was being preempted by something that was actually backwards, but it was backwards and forwards at the same time, and wistful.
Yeah.
And I think perhaps that little piece might have belonged more comfortably, perhaps, on Wind and Wuthering, its successor.
Yeah.
Perhaps soundtracky. People are using the word soundtrack more often these days.
Right.
And I think that certainly side 2 of Wind and Wuthering had more of a cohesive story, perhaps, and the soundtrack factor from that, with the allusions to Wuthering Heights and what have you. But Trick of the Tail,
So, Steve, just interject a second. So
sure.
We'll climb into some of the individual tracks in a bit more detail in a second. I'm just trying to kind of set the scene, because you'd had a very short window between the end of the Lamb tour and going into the studio. You'd been making the solo album, as we were just discussing, and Mike and Phil had been working on that. So when you first met in the studio, I know that Tony had got Trick of the Tail, because I think he'd written it many years ago.
Yeah.
And he'd written Madman Moon.
Yeah.
But it was a blank canvas apart from that, as I understand it. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so what was the process of creating the other tracks? How did that evolve?
It was driven by riffs, as many Genesis jams were. Mike would have the riff that kicked off Squonk, for instance.
Yes.
And the beginning of Dance on a Volcano, the ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. And then Phil said, "Oh, why not have
Yeah.
And something that sounded like it came out of country music sounded very different by the time you were doing it with 12-string electric guitar, the newly minted bass pedals, the Taurus pedals, which are absolutely made for Mike Rutherford, of course. So the character of the album really took off from there. there's a decoy right at the beginning. There's an arpeggio with a repeat echo on it that's in time, which completely throws you off the scent by the time. Ding, 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 ding. And I remember doing this with the band, and having agreed that bit, we then all continued on and all hit the accents in the ascending section that succeeds that. So we really were telepathically involved at that point. The language was writing itself. Nobody needed to say, oh, why don't we have an ascending section here? The Fast and Furious bit at the end was basically an idea of mine, embellished by the ideas of others who would say, oh, well, we could insert this in between, dun, 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 and all that. So had that.
Because that was one of the first tracks to go down, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It was one of the first, and but the first one that Phil did vocal on was Squonk.
Yeah, remember that. Yeah.
I believe it was Mick Strickland who'd recorded that with us. I might be wrong here. And Phil came in and said, "Oh, let me have a go." And Tony Stratton-Smith, head of Charisma, poked his head round the corner when just a few bars were recorded of that. And he said, "Oh, sounds marvellous. Sounds like you found your singer, boys. I'm off to the pub. See you later." Fine. Sanction of record company. Didn't want to stick around for the argument. But, okay, yes. He's got the right idea. Phil's got a marvellous voice. He'd already sung on my thing. He'd actually sung the very first...
He did More For Me, didn't he?
Did More For Me.
Absent Friends.
Absent Friends, yeah. So first thing that Phil and I had written for the band was for Absent Friends with his vocal.
Yeah.
But I think it's quite unusual for a band, apart from the Beatles, to have two really strong vocalists who could literally impersonate each other. When I first saw, or one of the first gigs, Genesis, before I joined, I was watching them thinking, sounds like there's an automatic double track on Pete's voice here. Only to realise that the drummer was singing along.
Yeah.
That fellow there doesn't just play drums. And I remember drawing up at a gas station at one point, and the others got out to do whatever to fill up, and Phil and I were there, and he was just started singing away something or other. And I said, "Phil, you got a really great voice. You sound a bit like Steve Winwood." "Oh, do you think so?" he said. And I had no idea, but you've got someone who sounds vaguely like Steve Winwood in the band. Why wouldn't you have him as the lead vocalist? Of course, the conjecture was very much driven by Mike. I don't think that singing drummers look very good live. And then you got into the whole debacle about, auditioning various others. And then when Phil was getting married, his first wife, Andy, I met John Anderson of Yes fame. And he said, "Yeah, I know you haven't got a vocalist at the moment, but why don't you make Phil the vocalist and get in an instrumentalist so you can fill in on drums?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I think you're right. I just don't know if the others will go for that." And indeed, it took us a while to get round to his level of thinking. I suspect he may have been a little bit surprised to find out that his old cohort on drums, Bill Bruford, was going to be just that man in the live context who was going to make that work for us, because Bill was, can't mince words here, he was a star in his own right. Every week there was something about Yes, and of course he'd not only blazed a trail with Yes, he'd done that with King Crimson. He had an impeccable pedigree there. He'd just spent some time working with Gong, where they turned up at friends' houses, and there wasn't hotels, sleeping bags, and the hippie commune vibe was in effect for that. So I think the idea of a band such as ourselves might have helped to pay the bills. I was surprised that he was prepared to join us, because I thought, he doesn't need us, we need him. And we did, and it worked very well. You know, the sanction from this other little band called Yes, thank you very much, was great for us, you know, wonderful. But I say little band, I was joking.
But just coming back to Squonk and Phil, I mean, it's kind of well documented that Phil himself was a bit reluctant to start with, because he really saw himself as a drummer rather than a singer.
The thing is that Phil said, I consider drumming to be a respectable gig, singing isn't. So he'd really sort of backed himself into that one in more ways than one. He didn't want to be a singer, but he also didn't want someone to do it less well than himself. And he was a man from the very first gig. He hit his marks perfectly. He was a professional. He had been through stage school, dancing, film work.
And that the rest is history, as they...
Yeah, he was already a vet by the time I was meeting a guy who I thought was just the drummer. Yeah. What did I know? Because he'd had, just to fill in for people who don't know, he had sung in Lionel Bart's Oliver on stage with Anthony Newley and Artful Dodger. That was Phil. Perhaps he'd adopted the persona of the cheeky chappy professional Cockney even then as a young boy, whereas perhaps Rada may have called. And in fact, he'd auditioned along with his girlfriend, I think it was at the Barber Speak School, for the part in Romeo in Zeffirelli's production of Romeo and Juliet, the Shakespeare. Yes, that's Shakespeare.
The lesser
known poet.
But Steve, one of the consequences about not having identified the new singer at that point in the process. Yeah. My understanding is that virtually all the tracks in the early stages were just put down as instrumentals.
Yeah.
So how did that influence the writing when you weren't actually getting the vocals laid over the top?
Well, I think there was an implication that I mean, for instance, I said to the band, well, I've got this thing that became entangled, and I played the verse of it. Yeah. Tony had something that arguably would fit with that, which was a little bit like a chorus, the 3-part harmony bit that Phil sang. And Phil immediately said, oh, this sounds over rooftops and houses. He said, this has got a Mary Poppins feel to it, and seemed to warm to it. And I did the lyrics, and including Tony's bits. So,
at what point did you do the lyrics then? Was it right at the end when you'd finished it?
I think it was either bolted together at that point, or it was in the stage where we knew it was going to have this melody that Tony was singing to it. He wasn't going to do it himself professionally, but the idea that a singer is going to do this. I think, you know, Genesis were very much, unlike other progressive bands, because we weren't using that word at the time anyway, it was a songwriter's band. That was the idea. Everyone was invited to write. So we could all write a tune.
So the fact that you didn't have the singer identified didn't inhibit you in any way from the creativity, from the sound of it?
Not really, no. The band was used to working as an instrumental unit. I think particularly during The Lamb, where you had Peter often writing in one room on his own, and the band writing something else in another, and then conferring, and sounds like University Challenge, but there we are. We conferred, we communicated. Young bands do confer and talk to each other. Yeah. Sometimes it can be phase cancellation. That's, you know, the frustrating thing about all bands who will underestimate the power of certain ideas or certain individuals. You know, who knew that Harrison could write so many lovely tunes when he was up against the other two monuments.
And with obviously, as you said, you know, he was writing the lyrics in the other room for The Lamb, but obviously in a number of albums you were all together in the writing and creation process. With four of you, did that create a lot more room to breathe and interact and to contribute, or not?
In a way, I think it did, yes. Having said that, I would have liked to have had a few months to, I mean, you know, once I switched on the tap for Acolyte, I couldn't stop writing then, you know, once you've done that, and once you've been the captain of your own ship. If I'd have had a little bit more time, then I would have come up with as many things as I did for Wind and Wuthering. That was
so in some ways, I think what you might be saying is timing conspired against you a little bit, because
it did.
Because it's well documented again that one of your frustrations and one of the reasons you left the band ultimately is that a number of your contributions weren't being given the room, they weren't making it to the album, and yet here you are with the four of you for the first time, and yet, as you said, you were fairly dry.
Yes.
Because of Acolyte.
Well, I think that founder members did tend to hold sway. So, you know, Phil and I were very much the new boys, and because of that, I think we were often reticent to put ideas forward. But then, in Phil's case, he hadn't really evolved into the writer that he was to become. He was very good at arranging, very good with rhythms, very good about seeing the way that melodies could go, and very good at dispelling tense atmospheres with the band, and things could get very intense at times. You know, frustrations were voiced out loud from time to time. Tony was very forthright, as he'll no doubt tell you. But the rest of us also had something to say. But I do think that Tony was a genius, and I'm amazed that everybody in the band, or having been associated with the band, had come up with things either collectively or individually over time that were extraordinary. So we were at the point where, by the time I was doing GTR a little bit later on, and it was noted, I think it was Time magazine was saying, oh, it's noted that all the members of Genesis from a certain era have got things in our top 20. And you know, it was a bit like, oh, you know, is this another latter-day Beatles? And were they? No, no way. And I love the Beatles. But I think that Genesis had some great songsmiths in it.
So which of the tracks on the album evolved the most, and where the band bouncing off each other really worked to its strongest?
The band bouncing off each other. Well, I think the opening track, no doubt, you know, because that's a group written, I'm going to say conversation, group written construct. Definitely that. I think that when Squonk started, it was literally a two-note riff. So that was really built in the studio. When it came to Entangled, the second track, I believe, I'd managed to take it so far, and then people were chipping in with ideas. Mike had an arpeggiated section that would be a bridge to something that, over the arpeggiated stuff, Tony had the brilliant idea of creating mellotron voices, a choral approach with a a synth sound that sounded at times, when it was immersed within that choral, electric choral sound, sounded remarkably like a soprano voice, a little bit like a theremin, I think. And it took something which starts with a tinkle. It's very typical with Genesis that start quietly with something, ding da da da, which is mine, and then ends up with, if not a roar, certainly a wall of sound at the end. It's interesting that Phil chose not to play drums on that at all, but to keep it to something acoustic. But by the time you've got a choir and a synth doing this choral thing, and you've got bass pedals thundering underneath and chiming massed 12 strings, you've got something which sounds very typically Genesis, I think.
Mesmerized children are playing, meant to be seen but not heard. Stop me from dreaming, don't be absurd. Become heavier still. Sleep. Won't you allow yourself fall? Nothing can hurt you at all. With your consent I can experiment further still.
Often to do things that were guitar driven or guitar based tunes usually meant that it would be arpeggiating 12 strings.
Right.
That was usually that. So if I wanted to be sure of getting something done by the band, I would usually have to commandeer Mike, get him on my side and say, oh, I got this little thing here. What do you think of that? You know, could you add something to that? One built alliances within the band in order to get certain things done. Tony and Mike vote together. I think if I'd have understood band politics a little more warily, perhaps I might have thought, oh, Pete, here's an idea, you know, but most of the time, it's interesting because over time, I think that Pete and I have often ended up, you know, opposite ends of musical spectrum, but at times we'd be sharing the phone book in terms of, you know, here's an interesting pride of South American drummers here. And so, you know, we'd sort of embraced that ethnicity. I was using massed drums pretty early on, and he was, I think, to do the same.
In terms of the album, the other group composition, at least that's credited as a group composition, is Los Andos, of course. Yeah. And I think the lick, wasn't that lick your instigation, as I understand
that's right. I had this dreamy little thing that was based on, and you hear it on It's Yourself.
The B-side to Ripples.
That's right. You hear on that. So some reissues, you can hear that. And so it was just fade in 12 strings and fade in and Phil, in an act of absolute genius, said, well, if I put this rhythm behind it, we could go ba 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 ba, and it just wildfire. There it was, wildfires straight off. think it's absolutely marvellous that when he now calls himself the band arranger, you know, none more so than a track like that that's could have been rescued from the waste bin. Fantastic. What a dreamy little idea. And who would have thought that this dreamy little hippie idea of mine could have been so energized by a guy seeing it from a completely different perspective. But once that was in place, then I was able to kick in with, well, then we could have, and let me off the leash and let me at it. I mean, pretty much like Dancing with the Moonlit Night, you know, that sort of thing where let off the leash. But I think with Genesis, you always needed an iconic riff in the first place, and one didn't always recognize an iconic riff when it first presented itself. Much the same as Pink Floyd talking latterly about some of the stuff they did for The Valley Obscured by Clouds, which became part of Dark Side of the Moon, Us and Them, and staring them right in the face. But that's how ideas work. Bands don't always make wise decisions. I know Phil said later on that he presented In the Air Tonight to them.
You know, goes down as folklore. You know, we're all wise after the event, aren't we?
Wise after the event.
Phillips.
Sorry?
To quote Anthony Phillips.
Wise after the event, yeah. Well,
but in terms of Los Endos, had It's Yourself been written first and you lifted that section out of it, the instrumental bit, or were they completely separate? Because you've got the vocal bit in It's Yourself, then you get that bit of the melody of Los Endos, which then made its way into the track.
Well, nobody knew at that stage whether that track was going to be involved or this track. And if you look at it in terms of Beatles' influence, the idea of reprising, in the best instance, what had been the main riff of Squonk, coming back at the end of Los Endos with complete grandiosity. Who knew at that stage is all I can say.
Right.
Votes were still being cast, so we decided it wasn't that strong within itself, but it had, if you like, grown up and had a child, and you know, from this bit of insemination, you got something else.
I just wondered, you know, I always wondered myself if It's Yourself had just been the vocal section and you'd stopped there and then you'd kept the rest separate and fed it into Los Endos, which of course you did with the second piece, whether a bit like, you know, short track like Absent Friends, whether that would have then made the cut.
It might have done. I think that it was regarded to be not as strong as some of the other ideas. Yes, I don't think it's not as strong. I don't think it's bad because Genesis cast-offs are mightily good, I would say, compared to most bands. So there.
Yeah. So we've talked about a number of tracks. Let's just come back to Ripples a minute and talk about how that built up, because again, another one where you didn't get a credit for it, but clearly there was a major influence in the middle section. How did that get built?
Basically Mike's tune, Tony's linking bit between choruses, a melody that I had over the top of that second section, that linking bit, which we turned into a whole deal. And Mike's song, I thought, yes, we're going to do this with 12 strings. Mike's playing down here. If I play a part that's an octave above, right at the top of what is possible on a 12 string, it'll give it a kind of chocolate box quality. And I felt that the album was heading in that direction. It was more lightweight than some of the things we'd done. The idea of, it's almost back to nursery crime with the sort of jokey trick of the tail, childlike sort of stuff. I think we were casting around for lyrics that weren't always the kind of stuff of I'm going to rip your corset off that goes with most rock and roll. Genesis wasn't that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So yes, chocolate box, and I think that was reflected in the kind of cover that we had, if you know what I mean. It could have been an illustration out of a child's book, couldn't it?
It could have been. I mean, that was Colin Elgie, who I think was a freelance for Hypnosis at the time.
Yeah.
Well, let's just talk a bit about the cover. Sure. You've mentioned it. So I gather he hadn't met you at the point he came up with the first draft, and
right.
I don't think he had any of the music.
Right.
And I mean, he might have had kind of an outline of the songs, but he came up with this amazing cover. I mean, can you remember when you first saw it, what your reaction was?
It was Hypnosis, of course, Storm and Poe.
Yeah, yeah.
And the thing, Storm Thorgerson was frustrated with Genesis. He desperately wanted us to use a photographic cover. That was their stock in trade, where they weren't having to outsource.
Yeah.
Basically, photography was the thing. Whether it's a guy standing there on fire, shaking hands with someone else, or
in Pink Floyd,
or a moo cow on the front, Pink Floyd, and you know, I remember that they tried to sell us an idea that ended up on the front of one of the Zepp albums. And I can't remember which one it is, but it's, you know, there's a family sitting around and they're all staring at a miniature obelisk in the middle of the table. That one, that black, you know, that was an idea. And Genesis went, no. And so there was always this emphasis on illustration will throw people off the scent of, we don't have to be pop stars on the front and don't have to worry about the way we look and our hairstyles and all of that. In that era, the tail wasn't quite wagging the dog in the way that it became later on. We were not glamorous. And especially you see early pictures of the band, you know, you see people, Pete wearing an old school scarf and his father's overcoat or whatever. It was very much the sort of Tom Baker look for Doctor Who. Not a million miles away. Yeah, there might be the odd fur coat being sported by Phil, or indeed even Bill Bruford. People were wearing little fur coats in those days, Eno, all of that. But then Genesis didn't really want to be stars in that way. They saw it as a limitation. And I think possibly quite wisely, because I think that if you played that game too easily and you became a pop star, your shelf life perhaps might have been rather shorter. You could have risen to the top. You could have been, you know, a one-hit wonder, but we weren't even trying to write hits. You know, if we had a hit in those days, it was a complete accident, like I Know What I Like. Yeah. Complete accident, complete fluke.
But he came in with these illustrations.
Yes.
Did your jaw drop when you saw it? I mean, how surprised were you?
Well, I think I was almost afraid to react in those days because I didn't always respond well to album covers.
Okay.
I used to think, oh, so this is going to define it. I was always worried that there's something that Chris Welch wrote when that thing that he would write in Melody Maker, teasers. This idea that, oh, you know, Led Zeppelin trashed this and did that, and The Who threw TV out of the window, and one of Genesis broke a teacup, and then he owned up, you know, the culprit. I was worried that the band were regarded as a bit lightweight and a bit fey and a bit, you know, are they red-blooded males or not? And so anything that alluded to that too much whimsy, I was worried was not going to set, the rock cognoscenti on fire. So I was coming to it from a different
You were thinking
angle.
about how people
You were
would
probably
react.
younger, seeing something, and when you receive it, the younger you are.
Yeah.
This is the whole thing. I've realised why so much early music remains with me, and I'll be 14 again listening to the Stones, trying to play along with every lick, or seeing King Crimson in 1969, and I'm still not a professional musician, but dying to, I've been waiting in the wings too long, let me in there, let me have a go. So I think the perspective was rather, I think everyone was quite reserved, thinking, well, will this work?
So you weren't very sure about it when you saw it?
I wasn't sure about it. I didn't know. I would have preferred something a bit more hard-edged.
Yeah. So how did it get through then?
How did it go?
How did the band say yes when people were looking at it and going, I'm not sure about this? What was the clincher?
No, what I'm saying is that you've got to remember that Genesis were very reserved. I suspect that successful bands are very reserved with others who are involved with them, and even with themselves. And Tony said, even Tony, with that iron will of his, would say, it's really terrible when I've got to play a new tune to you guys because you sit there all stony-faced. And I was thinking, well, it's a bit like Russian ice skating judges, isn't it? There'll be the Duchesnes, obviously, who should have won, but they're being marked down because it's political. So what I'm saying is, whenever anything was unveiled, there would be a stony silence.
Okay. And
people would not commit. So I don't really know what the others thought about it. I guess they must have thought it was adequate. Nobody turned around and said, that's truly horrible.
Yeah.
Therefore, or I think it was well painted, actually.
Yeah.
I'll say that. There are times when I would think about Genesis album covers. I would often think, well, perhaps this could be better technically. I would often think that the ideas were very good, but I would be thinking, oh, how can this be improved on? But I had no idea, I had no expertise. My father was an artist, but I wasn't gifted in that way. Selling England by the pound, I think the fact that they found a fine artist in the first place who was prepared to turn a cartoon into a...
This is Betty Swanwick.
Betty Swanwick.
Yeah.
I think, for me, that is Genesis' favourite album cover, because I think it's beautifully painted.
Yes.
It's beautifully crafted. It's wacky. It's got its own perspectives. People seem to be taking off as if they're filled with air.
Yeah.
There's a sense of impermanence about all the
a lot of fun about it.
A lot of fun about it.
Yeah.
On the English country scene, you've got all these characters that are being parodied, and I thought it was a perfect marriage of the music and the image. Yeah, it remains my favourite.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we stand back and look at the album now, 50 years on.
Yes.
Is there anything, with the benefit of hindsight, you would have changed fundamentally with that album? I know you've done different interpretations of the songs on your Genesis Revisited albums and live.
Yeah.
But looking at the album as a studio album,
yes,
is there something you would fundamentally change with it?
Well, I won't be as undiplomatic as Tony is at times, I think. But there are certain things I'm drawn to, and other things... I think that whenever the band tried to do something slightly McCartney-esque, it doesn't always work with me. okay, you've got this heavyweight band that's capable of great power when you see the band live. And I was only really aware of that fully when I saw the band a couple of years after I'd left, and they were, I think it might have been Duke or whatever the album was.
And then there were three was the first one.
Yeah. But I saw them around about the era of Duke.
Yeah.
And 50% of the songs were ones I'd been involved in with the band. And I got it for the first time what Genesis was all about. It sounded magnificent. The songs, even the weaker ones, I thought when it was presented within the whole, I thought was staggeringly good, and I couldn't sleep all night after I'd seen that and realised what I'd walked away from, you know, arguably the world's greatest band, doing arguably the world's greatest live performance, and I thought it was bloody marvellous. But at the same time, I think I made the right decision before you asked me, because without that I wouldn't have had the other 700 musical adventures that happened subsequently. But boy, did it make me try harder. It still does.
But in terms of the album itself, are you saying, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but are you saying that there's a little bit too much of a balance towards whimsical, quiet stuff in that album? Would you rather it have been more like dance and squonk and?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind the moments of whimsy on it, but I think if there had been a bit more, you know, the best of it for me is, Dance on a Volcano meets Los Endos. Yeah. When that was done live, when we did it on the Seconds Out era, and I watched them doing that live, exactly the same arrangement. Mm-hmm. And I thought, yes, the energy goes up and up and up and up. Yeah. And I've been doing the same thing myself ever since we've reinstated Dance on a Volcano into drum solo, whether it's two drummers or one or whatever, that goes into Los Endos. It never fails. It's
incredibly powerful pieces of music.
Goes nuts.
I mean, on dance, one thing I was going to ask you, when you did Genesis Revisited, I think it was the first album from memory. I must have got that wrong, but I think it was the first album. Yeah. You did Dance on the Volcano, and it really is quite different. I mean, you've got your voice, which is heavily processed, a lot kind of more grungy, heavier guitars. Yeah. Was that a deliberate thing because you'd always seen that track as slightly different, or not?
Do you know, I can't remember what the motivations were there. I probably should have gotten in another singer to do it. I don't think I was playing to my own strengths there, but I think the sound of it instrumentally, I think was very good. I seem to recall. It was Chester Thompson on drums on it, recorded in his studio in Nashville. And I think we had, I might be wrong here, it was either compressed ambient mics. It's a brilliant drum sound, which Roger King got together. Yeah, I've got a feeling we might have had 3 different ambiences on it going. And when there's 3 different ambiences on something, whether it's a drum kit or whether it's an orchestra, boy, does it make a difference. You know, it's this idea of, it's almost, what's the word? I would say sometimes you'll be in a hall, and when the hall is acting like an amplifier, and it's not just giving you what the band is giving you on stage, but out through a PA, through speakers up the front. And out front is responding. The hall is amplifying it, very often in places that were designed for acoustic things, orchestras and what have you. Sometimes, you know, that can be really, really good. Other times it can be a bit too swimmy, and you've got to accept the rough with the smooth. If you're playing arenas, the sound is invariably swimmy, and it used to sound like a 747 taking off. You know, sometimes the drums are, it's the slower things that worked with that, the majestic stuff, the Watcher of the Skies, introduction type stuff. You know, symphonic, Genesis symphonic works very well with large, you know, ambient halls and arenas.
So in terms of playing live,
yeah,
I think I'm right in saying you've played pretty much every track of Trick of the Tail live apart from Trick of the Tail itself.
we didn't play that, and we didn't do
Madman Moon, I don't think.
Madman Moon, yeah.
So I had a question for you about Madman Moon,
Yeah,
very much a Tony piece.
Yeah.
Do you ever thought about redoing that with a guitar backbone rather than piano?
I'd have to ponder that one.
Because you've never played it live, and I assume there's a reason why you've never played it live.
Yeah, well, because it's a studio construct. There are massed monophonic synthesizers in the instrumental part. And Tony was a fan of Respighi. I was familiar with the Fountains of Rome. I was not yet familiar with the Pines of Rome, which I think is arguably the superior piece. But Respighi, Italian composer, often writing in an earlier Baroque style, most famously the music for Going for a Song from The Birds. Okay, so Tony said, oh yes, so you know the Fountains, but have you heard? And to give this its full context, I believe that the music that we were doing on Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, Fly on a Windshield, contains the seeds of Respighi influence, I think.
Right.
Because you've got that idea of the legions coming to life in it, and you hear that within the Pines of Rome, the idea of a legion coming to life again, Sepulchre, Appian Way, the triumphal procession, all of that, which is why it's twinned with Mussorgsky's triumphal imagined procession through the Great Gate of Kiev, or Kiev as we say now, which was never created, of course. It was an artist's impression. But I think the reason we never did it, and the reason I've never done it, is because you really need an orchestra to play it, and an orchestral arrangement written for it, because an orchestra cannot drive itself.
So
it has to have an agreement.
Canada?
Sorry? Canada. How much is this man going to pay me to do this? It's a nice thought. It's a nice thought, and I think...
And it is just that, it was a thought, but it was just intrigued me why...
I did play a guitar on it. I literally play about 2 lines on it.
Yeah.
And
which is why I assumed you'd never done it, but I thought, well, if it was reimagined as a guitar emphasis track, maybe it would sound
it probably could have done with more guitar instead of being obviously piano and voice treatment. Could have done with that, and you know, it could do with a symphony orchestra in at the middle, and an arrangement by Respighi or Ravel. No problem. George Martin.
There you go.
Sadly, never got to work with George, but came close at one point.
Well, if it happens, you heard it here first, folks.
Yeah.
We'll see.
That's a good idea. It's
occasionally
a good idea.
I have them, not often, but occasionally I have them.
Yeah, no, it's a very good idea. I take a deep breath every time I'm going to reinvent or represent a Genesis idea that I haven't done either for a while or recently. You know, I would take a deep breath if I was to do Entangled again live, because it's a song built on slender threads, and songs that are built on slender threads, and I've had a few myself, songs that hang on arpeggios, you've got to get everyone in time. You've got to be able to hear each other very well, and be sensitive to the rallentandos, rubatos, all those things where things magically seem to slow themselves down with orchestras.
So it's a tricky one to play live then.
Yeah, all things that are like that, you know, without a drum kit thundering through it, and nobody really knows if they're in time or not. You're battling acoustics and everything, but it is a good song.
Steve, on that note,
right.
We'll finish the Trick of the Tail section. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.